Hi, my name is Michael Boxwell. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Voltempo. I've been involved with electric vehicles for way too long, and batteries for even longer than that. So I guess my story of electrification really started with handheld computers and industrial computers and mobile phone type technology. And you know, I was working on a project for a Windows smartphone back in 1994. Something like that. We couldn't get the batteries to work. So there's this weird thing called lithium ion that kept catching fire and stuff. So we created a Windows smartphone with an analog phone system in there and a hodgepodge of different battery technologies in that. And then my next task was to get lithium ion batteries to work. So we got into batteries from there, and that was I guess where I got into batteries, and I've never been able to get out of them since, really. So computers, and then later on into electric bikes and electric cars and everything else. And here I am many decades later still doing it, but there we go.
I'm Martin Rees. I'm chairman of Berkeley Coachworks and Berkeley Sports Cars, and I've taken on the challenge of reviving the Berkeley brand in automotive, in aerospace, and in anywhere that'll have them, really. But I started out in aerospace, which is one of the little-known facts of most people that have met me. But when I graduated in industrial design, I joined Westland Aircraft Group and was fascinated by the whole group's activity rather than it just being, as I was as a youngster, obsessed with aircraft, particularly World War II fighter planes. To be able to have the opportunity of joining Westlands was an absolute dream come true. And I think from that, understanding what innovation meant was something that was a very practical day-to-day experience where solving problems were immediate. We're always grounded in a certain reality that the engineers just had to do under enormous pressure and enormous stress to be able to find solutions to the most obscure problems. And that was a great grounding for an absolute raw recruit straight out of university, thinking that the world is going to be his oyster and realize it was going to be just a frozen can of tuna. So I'm working with a mix of engineers, draftsmen, guys who could just make anything from out of nowhere. It was just extraordinary. And I think that, unbeknownst to me, it was really the foundation that's taken me forward into what we're doing now. That understanding that if somebody throws you a problem, you don't run away from it. You have to find a way to solve it, because in those days, lives would depend on it. So if you can take that creative edge and apply it into some real world engineering and some real world products in whatever that technology is, and I think that's a special opportunity that I was gifted, that I've tried to embrace ever since. I think most of our best inventions have been at dinner parties.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, the thing is, you don't, when you do just day-to-day activity, it crowds out the bit of your brain that allows you to be innovative. And actually, that's the thing. When you just get a chance to sit down and just bounce ideas like this or whatever, you have no idea what's going to come out of it at the end of it, because, there's always something.
No, I think the day you turned up at our workshop when we were trying to convert buses to run on electric in 2006 for IKEA, for a 2-year trial, was the day we met. And it was those really difficult questions you kept asking that I thought, how am I going to get rid of this guy? And here we are, how many, 20 odd years later.
I still got rid of it.
But I think it was that, again, the questioning of everything. That's what came out of that meeting, is that, why are you doing that? Why have you done it this way? Why can't you do it a different way? And I think that's been the foundation of pretty much all the projects we've been involved in, is question everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And but also, being able to take a step back, if you like, from the coalface to look at the bigger picture, which is again, when you get really involved with the project, is really difficult. I guess one of the most creative times for me was COVID, when there was lockdown. And suddenly nobody was earning any money anymore. I wasn't. And focuses your mind, but also, okay, you've got time to think of the bigger pictures. And one of the things that came out of that was the battery that could charge in 6 minutes. And it was simply because the rest of the industry was really focused on how do we make these batteries smaller and more compact and get more energy in less space and all of that sort of stuff. And I thought, yeah, okay, fine. But what if you could actually release more power from a battery more quickly and look the other way and ignore the size and the weight, but just look at power delivery. So you can charge a battery really quickly and you can deliver power really, really quickly and efficiently. And, you just turn it on its head, turn what you're doing on its head. And of course, we then went on to work on the 6-minute EV project together. And,
but it's always made me wonder why you asked us. What was, because we weren't involved in battery per se. We've been involved in vehicle design, development, putting electric motors in race cars and all those things. But what prompted you to ask me and our organization to be part of that? Because it was a brilliant project, and one had so many consequences to why we're in Trocoon in West Wales was a consequence of you involving us in the battery feasibility.
Because most companies can't think out of the box. Most people, are scared of true innovation and coming up with something that genuinely hasn't been done before. Now, you've broken land speed records. You don't do that by just copying the norm. You've created some real innovation. I mean, you've been involved with electric vehicles, what since the 1990s, 95, 96?
1995.
Yeah. And nobody was thinking about electric vehicles back then. And being able to take a new concept that's never been tried before and making something out of it is something that you do better than probably anyone else I know. And so, yes, okay, it was a different piece of technology, but I knew if I brought it to you that you'd be able to do something with it that other people wouldn't be able to see. Simple as that.
That's probably something that we do quite instinctively. I think everything, again, going back to the Western days, where you had to find solutions for the most ridiculous problems, where they truly were life and death. And I think we've just taken that thinking forward and question everything. It's the only way you can really drive true innovation, is that if you don't question everything, you're just going to find a fairly straightforward solution. And that's fine in some applications. Yeah. But we've always wanted to challenge the norm, as you have. I think that what you've done with the charging networks and your products at Voltempo have been outstanding. But I think fundamentally, though, for us, we've always tried to find the normality in it, in whatever we've tackled, not trying to find the extraordinary, but how do we make this normal? How do we make this acceptable? How does it fit within a kind of a regular product line? Because it's always puzzled me that almost the exceptionalism of EV has been something I've found quite strange. Because it is fundamentally just another motor, and the battery isn't just another fuel tank in its simplistic forms. How you use that technology and how you apply it to distinct applications and niches is where the interesting bit comes. And you and I have seen many projects that have tried to be square pegs in round holes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's got to be electric. And we go, no, it doesn't. That's not going to be the optimum route for that technology and the application you're looking for. Yeah. And I think it's like all innovators, everyone I've known have been very individually brave people, prepared to take risk, prepared to fail. Yeah. And I don't think we embrace the notion of failure in the right way in this country. And I think you've got to be prepared to fail.
Yeah. And it can be scary sometimes, particularly when you do fail.
Yeah. And you have to dust yourself off and you have to carry on, because if you fail once, that's your opportunity to improve. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we would both had dark times where in there as well. But you've been involved. What was your first electric vehicle you got involved with?
First electric vehicle was a Formula 3000 race car that Sheffield University were trying to adapt to electric.
Okay.
And they were struggling with, even though the technology was fantastic, which were hub motors developed by Sheffield University, and an incredibly talented team at Sheffield University led by Phil Allen, who's still making tremendous electric motors on the South Coast. But it was the application that was foiling them, is how do we make this work as a product? We have an amazing piece of technology, permanent magnet motors, and we have some pretty old, sticky little batteries that are going with it, and we've worked out the electronics, but somehow it just wasn't working in the application that they were seeking, and that was, can we go racing in it? And that's a very different proposition to an industrial machine or a regular high-volume automotive application. And so we said, well, let's go and break a record. Let's see what it actually can do and what are the extremes of that technology and how far can it go. So we then put that into the very first Bluebird electric land speed rocket in a very simple chassis that was designed by Chris Humberstone, long since passed, I'm afraid. And we went out, and the purpose behind that was not actually to break records. That was to go and see what the extremes of that technology could be in that day, which was very early. And that was, of course, limited by battery performance more than anything. The motor was superb. 96% efficient, which is only 3% more efficient than an electric motor in 1898. So that in itself was quite intriguing to find that actually the increments of development in electric motors had very little room to improve, whereas battery had a
huge way to go.
Huge way to go.
Lead acid batteries back then, wasn't it?
We did advance to gel lead acid.
Indeed. That's if you wanted the optimum out of those, you had the optimum temperature and all sorts of different things. It was I did a fair amount with lead acid batteries. When the G-Whiz came along, so the little quadricycle, four-seat quadricycle, really popular in London for a while, they had lead acid batteries, and come the winter they were failing and they were very temperamental. I worked with on those. We got a heating system working on the batteries, better insulation, and got the performance a lot better. And then I tinkered with the battery management system and got to the stage where we could effectively double the range. And that was always fun. And that got me doing some stuff with Mahindra, Riva, who manufactured the G-Whiz at that time. And which was good. And then from that, it got me into Mitsubishi and then into Nissan on their project teams looking at the software development on the batteries.
And about the same time, we both had our interaction with Top Gear.
Oh, God, yeah. That thing, wasn't there? Blowing up G-Whizzes. Yeah.
Which was your G-Whiz?
No, mine was the stunt doubles.
Oh, yeah.
So mine was the one that didn't get blown up. And, we were at the racetrack, and they put Formula 3 wheels on the cars to give it more, nothing really, but it looked better. And we were racing it against one of the remote control cars. And Ben Collins was controlling the remote control car. He was the Stig. And so there's one piece of the footage which did make it onto the end cut where he tried to drive underneath the car and I swerved and ran over his car. So I beat the Stig.
We were asked to do an electric sports car, and they promised us faithfully that it was going to be a proper car based on a TVR chassis.
Yeah.
It's going to be pucker. So please don't. We said, look, we cannot get involved in something that was just going to be a laughing stock, something for a joke. And he said, no, we're going to do this. So we turned up their workshop in Oxford, and there was the chassis, and we brought all the kit and equipment. And then we suspected that we saw the garden chair, plastic chair in one corner. We saw a lot of aluminium sheeting in another. And we just said, well, what's going to happen? They said, well, Jeremy's decided to style the car. And we thought, no, this is going where we don't want to go. So we kindly said our goodbyes and left them to it.
That's right.
Of course, the result was one of the funnier episodes, yes, but certainly wasn't a well-styled sports car.
Yeah, no, good fun. But
it was a really interesting time because, as you said earlier, there were so few people talking about EVs as a major force in the way it's become. we both knew that that was going to be the case. I mean, it was just, how quickly it was going to be adopted, and particularly in the UK and all the charging infrastructure issues that were existing then and have continued to a certain extent, only now being fully addressed.
Yeah.
But it was, in the dark days of 2 decades ago, there often seemed little hope that there was going to be a major uptake. We focused a lot on commercial vehicles and did a number of concepts.
What got you into commercial vehicles? Because when you got into electric properly outside of land speed stuff, it was straight into commercial vehicles. How did that come about?
The recognition we got because of Bluebird. And again, I would take too much credit for Bluebird. There was a huge team behind the whole Bluebird land speed record and a massive following for the Campbells. But it was a great project to be able to go out there and test things to extremes, even though in those days, those extremes were not that huge. And, the records that we set, I think 12 of them, all tumbled within a couple of years by various people because the technology increased significantly over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But that's the point of record breaking, is that if you want to keep a record, don't set it. The whole point is to set it for somebody else to break it.
Yeah.
And if you become too obsessed with what you've achieved, then you're missing the point. It's to go out there, push the boundary a bit further for somebody else to then push on again. And I think that's always been a healthy position for any record breaking, is just to set a target for somebody else to break.
Yeah.
If we held the land speed record for the fastest milk float in the world for
That's right.
most of those 20 years until somebody broke it in 2014.
When they broke it, you did it properly with an electric motor, and they beat it with a Lamborghini V12, didn't they? They cheated, but there we go. No, even then, when they did the first run, it wasn't as quick as yours.
I was going to say, the whole basis of the land speed record was based on cheating, and almost exclusively by the French.
By the French, well, what do you expect?
Because they in those days, 1890s, it was a case of who could go the fastest. So the French, of course, decided the best way to go faster was downhill. Mm-hmm. So the FIA decided that was cheating. So they'd have to do it on the flat. So the French, being the French, decided that they'd wait until the wind was strong to push them. And then the FIA said, well, that's cheating as well. So you'll have to come back the other way. So they'd often wait 3 weeks for the wind to change. So eventually the basic land speed record terms that remained the same, that you have to do it on the flat in both directions within 60 minutes, just to avoid the French cheating. But the fact that the very first land speed records of all time in 1898 were set in electric vehicles has always fascinated me when explaining to people that this is new old technology. This is just improvement. And that's how it should be. That's record breaking over 150 years. Is continual improvement, allowing engineers and innovators to come up with different solutions to do something very, very basic, and that go out and see how fast you can go. And that does improve the breed. It does make you more efficient, and because you're looking for those little wins, those extra little tweaks to the aerodynamics or the tweaks in mechanical efficiency and all those things that make pushing the boundaries of engineering that little bit further. And we played a tiny part in all that. There's been some phenomenal projects over the years, and as a result of Bluebird, we were part of the original consideration for Formula E, I think what was grandly called the Formation Committee in 2010, which led to the series being formulated in 2012. And it's been a great success, a very brave decision to go ahead with it. And the FIA should always be applauded for that decision, because it has been a tremendous success in motorsport and has led to a number of new formula on the basis of how that works as a series.
It's interesting what you were saying about racing improving the breed and all that sort of thing. I was at Silverstone last week, and the Formula student teams were out with their electric cars, and there's a big competition over 5 days. But one element of that was autonomous motor racing. So they've got 4 very small, fully autonomous vehicles, and the students are learning how to race those and develop those. And of course, it's a great way of getting people excited about new technology and something clever, but a really good way of training students to understand what's coming next and how do we get those small gains and everything else and improve the breed. So we've seen it with electric vehicles, and now we're seeing it in autonomous vehicles or some sort of thing, using racing just as a way for people to cut their teeth and to learn and to.
There's only one problem with autonomous racing: they don't crash.
Apart from one of them, definitely got signs of damaged bodywork. So something went wrong somewhere. I don't know exactly what happened where, but there was definitely one that had been rebuilt from a crash.
There's been a few people that have said, do you really think it's sensible to have autonomous vehicles racing? I said, no, if it's a spectacle, if it can engage an audience because of the technology, if it gives different people the opportunity to go racing in a different way, it'll be successful.
Yeah.
It's a bit like rugby in some respects. As a Welshman, I would say this. But it was a sport for all sizes, all shapes, all capabilities. And I think racing generally can be that as well. There's a new scooter racing series that's getting off the ground, not literally. But,
hopefully.
And I think, again, it's that going back to improving the technology, giving it every opportunity to see how it performs, and it should be welcome. I don't think we'll ever be short of race series.
No, I agree.
And it is my ambition to get Berkeley back into racing. It's the cars of the 50s were good little race cars.
Oh, yes.
So taking those principles forward into a modern Berkeley and to take it racing is clearly an ambition we have.
Yeah. So the first commercial vehicle that you actually built, it was a milk float, wasn't it? It was type thing, but it was completely reimagined. It didn't look like any milk float anyone had seen before. You had a standing driving position and all sorts of things. Tell me more about some of the innovations and where they came from to create that vehicle.
It goes back to, and again, keep praising the opportunity I had at Westlands. I was questioning everything. Ask why every day. Why is it that way? Why can't we change it? And it was the same here when we were approached by Express Dairies, who had the largest electric commercial fleet in the UK at the time. They were aware that in the commercial sphere, things were changing. They're going to open the license for parcel delivery, that home food delivery was going to become more of the norm. And as they said at the time, every day they passed 90% of the UK's doorsteps. So extending their opportunity to be able to deliver parcels, mail, food, as well as their usual dairy product was a no-brainer. What they didn't have were the vehicles to be able to do that efficiently, and how they were going to cope with an increased drop rate. So going from maybe 300 drops per duty cycle to nearly 1,000. Was going to be a huge leap, and therefore the vehicle needed to change. But typical for us, we said, let's look at that. What is that going to mean? And you mentioned it was a semi-standing driving position, because we researched the impact on that number of times getting out of a seat and getting back into a seat on the driver's physical condition. And we through a fairly long study, concluded that a semi-sitting or semi-standing position was going to have the least impact on the driver's body. So we just took our usual course of evaluation, really strip everything down to the ground and go, what needs to change? What has to stay? So if it's going to be a 3.5 ton vehicle that needs to carry 1.25 tons, but also has to have a slug of batteries, how do we make that work? And that meant looking at a more of a composite structure, looking at a different design for how you build that vehicle. And we achieved it. We achieved a vehicle that was 3.5 ton GVW and could carry 1.25 tons. And we looked at all the aspects of how that vehicle could be used efficiently. But like all these things, you know that, you and I have been involved in projects that have been just that little bit ahead of time. Yeah. Where we've kind of seen an opportunity, created the product, influenced the market, influenced an industry.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. We did that with cargo trike. We did that with a number of projects that
10 years ahead of its time.
Yeah.
I mean, the cargo trike is a good example. You know, a inner city delivery pedal trike with a 1/4-ton payload, detachable pods. Incredible technology back in 2013. But way too early. And, if we did that again now, then there's a market for it. And the specification of what we created hasn't been surpassed today.
But that is the essence of innovation, and particularly the essence of UK innovators.
Yeah.
We don't do it because there's a market. We do it because there's a problem to solve. And if we can influence a market to adopt that solution, then great. Frequently, I think we get that thinking wrong because we don't see the commercials first. We see the solution and then we go and make it. And I think there has to be a realignment of how British innovators and innovative companies look at the way they're tackling the markets, tackling the opportunities with much more of a commercial reality in mind. We are a nation of inventors.
Yeah. But the other element there, I mean, we were so early that even the politicians were against it. Nowadays they're saying, the micro-mobility is everything. And back then they were saying this is a terrible idea. And we were so far ahead of the game that actually it was very difficult to get buy-in from anyone. Innovate UK was saying that there's no market for this. We shouldn't be developing this sort of technology. When we got it in front of politicians, the reaction was, do we want to see this sort of vehicle on our roads clogging up the roads for proper traffic and vans? And even when we were trying to demonstrate that in a congested city, this is a better delivery solution, and working with partners, it was just too early. But
that very much was the key to the work that we've undertaken. Collectively and individually, is not just producing product, but producing a solution and backing that up with some market fact. And saying this can be addressed. This does suit where we think this market's going to go.
No, we've certainly learned from it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the whole thing with e-freight was, and what we've done with the electric HGVs and trying to bring as much of the industry along with us as possible, not just the freight sector, but also customers and politicians and everything else. Having Sir Vince Cable involved has been fantastic. And now we're going to the next stage and talking about working with up in Wales and up in Scotland. Well, there's new parliamentary elections in Scotland for next year. So how do we engage with the whole of the whole of the Assembly and the MSPs and the new people who could come on next year? So discussion today, even with Sir Vince Cable, to say, look, okay, how do we get, Lib Dem MPs up to speed with what's going on and so on? And making sure that we bring along as much of society as possible on this journey and so that they understand that as an industry, we have some great innovators, we've got some great technology, we got some great people, and with the freight logistics sector, we got a whole industry of problem solvers. That's what they do. And, I think we can do something quite special there, but we need to bring everyone along with us.
Do you think we're still in that danger of being ahead of the game? I mean, as you know, when you asked us to be involved in E-Freight 2030, it was very much around the battery project.
It was.
And my answer was, well, that's great, but the OEMs involved are not going to accept our batteries because they have their own solutions. But we'll look at the trailer. Nobody's looked at the trailer before. Let's look at that afresh. And we've done exactly with the trailer what we've done with everything previously. Ground up reevaluation. What do we need to do to make this different? And can we add value and all the stuff that we've done? But does that mean we're falling into our usual trap of being ahead
too early? Yeah. Well, the history will tell. But there are, electric HGVs. There's a lot of talk about them and a lot of positive stuff and a lot of negative stuff. We clearly need to decarbonise, but we also need to do it in such a way that it helps fleet operators. Anyway, so at the moment there are lots of drawbacks. You've got to plan the charging time, and you've got potential weight penalties because of the additional weight of the batteries and things like that. So we need to make sure that we have solutions to those. And lightweighting and what you've done on the trailer, for instance, is incredible. So you could take the trailer and take 2 or 3 tons out of the weight of the trailer, which more than compensates for the weight penalty of the battery electric truck. So suddenly you're going to, back into the situation where you're carrying the same amount if you change the technology in the trailer. And that's really exciting. The battery charging speeds are getting faster, and megawatt charging means that that will become less of an issue. So when a driver goes back to your depot, you'll be able to plug it in. And if where you need to charge up in 45 minutes and be gone again, you'll be able to do that very quickly. But the number of times actually you don't need to do that. You've got an hour or two or whatever. As long as we can plan that time in, then we can use electric trucks in the same way as diesel trucks. The third element of that is it's too expensive. We need to bring that price right down. So the running costs clearly are lower, which is great, but we've got to get the capital expenditure cost down, or balance it so that, okay, yes, the trucks are more expensive on a lease. If you're leasing your vehicles, by the time you take into cost the fact you're not spending so much on diesel and servicing and so on, actually it works out slightly cheaper that way. And there's still more work to be done on there. But I think on the technical side there, what you brought in on the lightweighting, this wheel, for instance, you've gone and reinvented the wheel. And that's
you promised
great.
me you wouldn't say that.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
But that's true. But it's an indication of where do we actually add the value. You go back to, yes, we've got electric trucks and we can power the axles on the trailers and we can but where do we add in the real value to be able to operate that commercially? So we have to lightweight. We have to improve the aerodynamics. We have to reconstruct the trailer from the ground up. Again, not just take it a simple route. We just hope we're in the right place at the right time for when, with Zahid and with the whole project, the UK freight industry is looking actually to decarbonize effectively. And we have to look at all the aspects, whether it is new materials, new technologies, as well as redefining how these products are used in the real world. And I still think that's key to it, is that ultimately kind of the fanciest project out there. But if it can't be applied to the real world, then it's not going to be adopted.
Yeah.
And we did learn the hard way that at the end, a famously large logistics company in 2000 came through the door and said, we would like one of your trucks or one of your commercial vehicles, provided it doesn't cost me a penny more than a diesel transit. And we said, well, I don't think we can achieve that. We did, which is the irony. But given that proposition was really tough in 2000 and 2002 to try and even contemplate meeting that when you're up against the giants of the industry. And again, which is it's an incentive, but it's also a problem for small, nimble companies like Berkeley and numerous others in the UK that are trying to address some of these problems when they're faced with giant corporations with massive budgets.
Yeah.
How do we stay relevant? How do we carve our own niche and still make great product that people want to adopt and scale into volume?
And we had that on the charging side. When I set up Voltempo, previous to that, I was working for a different company. We built a charging hub at Heathrow Airport, 20 bays, up to 150 kilowatt charging, battery backup, all that sort of stuff back in 2017, 2018. And great. But when you're doing a project like that, you learn just as much how never to do it again as you do about what you've achieved. And there's a huge amount of learning. And from that, I thought, actually, there's a better way of building the charger. So instead of having a single charger charge a vehicle, let's have a big charger that can charge a fleet. And that was important because electric cars are getting faster at charging. So instead of 50 kilowatts, they became 75 and then 100 and 150. And the chargers were not keeping up. So you put a charger in the ground and 18 months later, it was obsolete. Well, that's no good for anybody. So, but if you say, right, let's make a megawatt charger and then we split the power out, then it doesn't matter what speed each individual car comes in at, you can provide the right amount of power. And when somebody comes up with a more powerful car, you can reallocate the power accordingly and everyone gets what they need. And if you've got a situation where, you've now got demand outstripping your 1 megawatt of supply, you then start getting clever about, well, okay, who's got the lowest state of charge, who needs to be leaving earlier, and you get clever with the algorithms so you deliver the amount of power that you need so that everybody's happy.
And do you think that in the UK, we are truly leading the world in some of these creative solutions? Because with a rapidly expanding information sharing capability around the world, can the UK hold its own in fresh innovation?
We've always been really good at that early stage. Hey, I got a great idea. What can we do with it? The UK is as good as anywhere and probably better than most at that. We've got a history of being innovative people and having innovative companies doing innovative things. The problem we've always had is taking that product and getting the finance to make it work and getting it into the marketplace. And other countries can do that, have done that better than us. So certainly what's going on in China, I would suggest that what we've seen in the last 20 years is they've learned by copying other people. In fact, you've got a good example of that where somebody phoned you up saying we like the electric truck and having trouble with it.
To be specific, it was, we're having a problem copying your design. Could you help us?
Yes, that's right. That got you into working with China.
It was the honesty that got me. I thought it was wonderful. I was intrigued to know more about whether that honesty was sincere or not, and it was. And they fulfilled every aspect of what they promised in that situation. It meant that we effectively had to stop doing what we were doing in the UK because there was little point. There was going to be a poorly engineered version of poorly copied version of our vehicle in the UK at half the price. And you know the reality of where that was going. So we had to license the design to the Chinese, and they made thousands. They never made it back to the UK because they couldn't fill the demand in China at the time. You have to embrace those challenges. You can't fight against them. You have to understand that, okay, well, I've done my job. That's the meeting we had internally. I said, look, we've done our job. We've created something that somebody wants.
Yeah.
And we have to let them take that further forward than we could.
Mind you, the build quality of the very first ones was scary, wasn't it? I remember some coming off the line and, absolutely rubbish.
Well, at that point, this is going back to the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, I think.
Beyond that, I think, because I was already involved to a certain extent. It was now about 2007, I think, the first one.
I forget. I'm getting old. What was fascinating about really what changed in my 42 trips to China over whatever it was, nearly 15 years, on 6 reasonably sized projects with a number of companies out there. The change in that country between my first visit and my last visit was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And just full of admiration for what they did as a nation. When we first went there, they typically, it was a case of bringing people from poverty into a urban environment with a very simple plan, which was and in this case, and this was repeated many, many times, those people that came from those villages, the first thing they would do is build their accommodation block.
Yeah.
And then those same people would then build a factory. And at the end of that process, those same people would be taught to weld, to engineer, to assemble. And within 18 months had become a pretty effective workforce. Quality was an issue, as you rightly said. And most of the supply chain was government supplied parts. And we're well aware of the industry of producing golf buggies for the world. But they learned on the job. No different for how we did 200 years ago.
And the point was that we didn't have the internet and everything else, so nobody knew about it. But the other thing is that a lot of this societal change took place over decades and decades. And China has compressed it into 18 months, 2 years. We've seen the same in India. A lot of the societal change is really compressed. And there are welfare impacts from that and all sorts of other things as well, and abuse and everything else which comes out in that, which happened in the UK, but over a longer period of time. And again, we didn't have the internet, so nobody knew about it. And one of the things I've been impressed, also in India, to be fair, a lot with India, is actually how the welfare and some of these other issues are being addressed much more quickly than the UK ever did. And people complain, India is still sort of 60 years behind and everything else in terms of mental attitudes towards women and all of that sort of stuff. But look how quickly they're catching up, and in terms of that things which would take generations for us to do, they're doing in 5, 10, 15 years. And it's incredible to see.
I argue it's our duty to support and not to compete, but to collaborate. I think if it's one thing I've learned over 30 years in EV is that collaboration is everything. And that if we are going to stay relevant and if we are going to continue to compete, we can only do it through effective collaboration. I think the one thing I really every day wake up for is challenge. And if I wake up in the morning and I know absolutely what I'm going to do that day, I think that's a day off. I just sincerely, because it's something we do here at Berkeley, and I've really tried to encourage it, is that sense of what can we change today? Whether it's your approach to the way you work, whether it's the answer in the brief for the customer, or whatever it is you're doing, what can we change? Can we do something different that makes it better? That's not easy. You can't fund that. You can't. There's no customers for that necessarily. It's just to me, it's an ethos that you have to decide you're going to be or not, because it's. And I'm not saying we're right. This is just the way I want this small, tiny operation to work. It would inevitably change if it was a different scale. This only applies to how we are now and how we work. So the future is scary, and so it should be. We don't know what's going to hit us tomorrow. There'll be a new challenge. But if you embrace those challenges, then, that's worth waking up for.
That's true. And I think it's also that inquiring mind and all, not being happy with the status quo and being a bit restless, I think, is something that.
And I think, to be fair, that's why we've stayed colleagues and friends for so long, is the fact that we are by nature restless, and we do have these conversations that sometimes can be crazy.
Yeah.
And talk about silliest things, but there's always that edge of change to it. There's always, we're exploring stuff.
Yeah.
And that's invaluable.
One of my friend's sons was saying to me the other day, I said, I'm 16 years old. He said, I still have no idea what I want to be when I grow up. And I said to him, I'm 55 years old and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up either.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's always going to be that element of, what's next. And for me right now, I think that what we're doing with electrification, finally, we're at the right place at the right time. I think that having been 10, 20 years ahead of the curve, and that's not a good place to be, financially at least. But right now, suddenly I found myself at the right place at the right time doing the right thing. But
the curious thing is, I can guarantee you and I do not think of it in that way.
No, we don't.
Because we're already moved on.
That absolutely, and autonomous vehicles is part of that. You start looking at the problem I have with electrification is, yes, we need to do it. We need to decarbonize, and electric vehicles. And everyone talks about hydrogen, and hydrogen is a problem for all sorts of reasons in this industry. There are other industries where hydrogen is perfect, but I think that the running costs of a hydrogen vehicle will never be cheap enough to make it viable. And we will fix the problems with electrification, with range and performance and everything, range in particular, way before we solve the problems with hydrogen, as we have with cars and vans.
I take a different view on it. I always imagine this same conversation back in the day when they were talking about the uptake of steam. And they go, no, it's never going to be adopted. That's never going to work. And then the engineers solve it. Then the innovators get their hands on it. The hydrogen fuel cell was invented by William Grove in 1854 in Swansea. And the first person that he knew he needed a rare metal, platinum, to make this work. And the only person he knew that had any knowledge of platinum was a jeweler in London. And the jeweler and a friend, decided there was something in his technology and they would support William Grove, and that was Johnson Matthey. And they've stayed making those ever since in various different areas of activity. But it's the same that everyone said then. No, it can't work. How are you going to solve this? Never going to. The engineers will inevitably solve it when they're
yeah.
given the reason to do it.
I mean, there are some fantastic opportunities for hydrogen and fuel cells in all sorts of different areas. And aerospace is a good example of that, where batteries are really going to struggle. I mean, we can solve the problem, but it feels like square peg round hole to me. And I think with electrification of heavy goods vehicles, we've got a solution which can work incredibly well. But it doesn't solve the problems of the industry. We've got an industry where profit margins are 1-2%. It's tiny. You're adding complexity to your business to bring in electric vehicles today. Now we'll solve that problem. But if you look at other problems in the industry, you've got so many drivers coming up to retirement age and not the young people coming in below to come into this industry. Autonomous vehicles changes that dynamic. It doesn't mean that every driver is going to be unemployed. Of course it doesn't. There's going to be lots of applications where you have part-time drivers or a driver doing multiple routes in different ways. Or you'll have situations, for instance, where your Ocado delivery driver won't go to the depot to stock his vehicle to come out and then do his route, then go back again. Whoever's at the depot in the first place has already sorted the orders or put on the vehicle. The vehicle will drive to meet the driver at the beginning of his route, and the driver is just a customer service representative presenting a Ocado to customers, and I'll carry your stuff into your kitchen, Mrs. Jones, and all of that sort of stuff, and focused on that. You're then saving 2 hours a day for that driver to spend more time with his customers. And, so there's all sorts of applications there, but also the long motorway journeys and all of that sort of stuff. If you've got a driver on board, then he could be sleeping in the back of his vehicle doing that bit, and then he's busy at the other end doing the pickups and drop off and so on. Or other cases where it's simply A to B, you got rid of the driver completely on that scenario. So you're reducing cost, you're creating an opportunity for businesses to earn an awful lot more money. For the small HGV operator who might have 2 or 3 vehicles today, he could still have 2 or 3 vehicles today that are autonomous. And now, effectively, he's managing that asset. Those vehicles could be going off tramping all around the country. You might not ever see them again. They might be at different depots or different charging points every night. But he's now earning money in much the same way as he is today, but it's simplified it for him. I think there's some great opportunities to actually solve the problems that the industry have got, rather than just fixing one little element of it, which is, in this case, decarbonisation.
Well, it also, I have no idea whether this story is relevant to the broader thinking of the uptake of autonomy. But I'm speaking to an American rig owner. In America, it's quite different to the UK, in that we do have more fleets here than America has the more individual
man in his truck, isn't it? Yeah.
And I had to ask him the question. I said, what's your view on autonomy? And he said, I can't wait.
Yeah.
So because I can stay at home and make money. Because if I own the truck and that's an autonomous truck doing the delivery, then I don't have to sweat.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the same conversation with Uber drivers in the UK. Great, I'm going to get an autonomous vehicle and it can go and do work for me while I'm at home. Yeah, brilliant.
Whether that proves to be the reality is again going to be,
of course,
market defining. But it goes to show that innovators cannot and should not ignore the market reality of what they're innovating around.
Yeah.
And if you don't take into account what that market needs, then your development, your innovation is going to be wasted. It's the best innovations are ones that are solving problems.
But the other element is sometimes somebody invents something and it ends up being used in a completely different way than they ever anticipated. And it's so much better than than the original innovator could have ever done. So the original camera phone type stuff, I'll come back to that, the bits I was doing in that. We brought a camera phone to the biggest distributor for our products in the UK. And the guy picked it up and looked at it and smiled and took a photograph of himself. I thought, what's he doing? Well, he invented the selfie. And it was the first indication that people will use a camera in a phone in a totally different way to a camera separate to a phone. Now, we thought it would be used for part of data collection. So you'd use it, engineers, for instance, taking photographs of work done on site or what have you, or a traffic warden taking a photograph of an illegally parked car and logging the registration number and the details of the incident, that sort of thing. It was a data collection tool, if you like. But of course, and this was, 5, 6, 7 years before Facebook and things like that, we had no idea that actually what people wanted to do with it was, document their lives. And yes, we did put camera data and photographs together, but in a completely different way. And the camera phone product was a complete commercial failure to the point where we decided to drop it before launch. We had the computer with the camera, but not the phone, and it was a complete failure. But we got the patents, which ended up being worth billions. Long after I left the company, but those patents ended up being worth billions of pounds. But we had no idea, as the innovators, that actually we were going to create something that would change the way that society talks to each other or anything else. And I think if we'd thought that, I don't know what we'd have invented. It would have been, or whether we'd run screaming for the hills, I don't know. But
so, do we agree that the future is, for us, more of the same?
Definitely. I can't see myself changing. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Yes.